Americans are quick to assume that people of color are always poor, and that's why in my first research study on social class disclosure at work, I interviewed only white men because I was wondering if, without racial stigma and gender stigma, that they would still be identified as poor. And I found that most of the white men did try to hide it, but most of them couldn't. There were still nonverbal cues that gave it away. But I only knew to do this in my study because one of my advisors was a black woman who was married to a white man, and she was like, look, people assume that I'm the one who grew up in poverty, and it's not true. So you're going to have to always account for race and gender biases when you're looking at your work, and that's why I always have. And I only recently included neurodivergence, but I always included race and gender because in the US those are tied to our class system. Because I'll admit it, when I first started graduate school, I was still very ignorant to a lot of biases, as we all are, about things that aren't about us. And as a white woman, I wasn't even really aware of sexism, to be honest, at that time. So definitely credit that professor with a lot of why my work has been successful. Now, interestingly, Americans like to also assume every person of color is poor, but then when you point out systemic biases that are racial, like to point to the rapper or Beyonce or whoever, or athlete who has a lot more money than them, to negate that. But as with anything, if you can only think of a handful of examples, an exception doesn't mean that a bias isn't real.